Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I've got a very special guest for you and a very important topic that is close to my heart and also I think close to people around the world because it's a topic that is affecting humanity on a scale that we probably don't even appreciate at this stage. But it's about what we eat. It's about what our children eat, and it's about the consumption of meat. And is meat bad for us? And how do we create better guidelines around eating meat, and how do we understand whether whether our children should be eating meat, and how do we approach those issues? Today, I'm here with Diana Rogers, founder of Sustainable Dish and co-author of the book Sacred Cow. Diana, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Diana, there's so much to your work, and I've just finished your book, and I loved it, and I really think it's such an important topic. But I just want to kind of take people back, a little bit into how you got into this area, because I think it's so important, because there's so much to this area, and I think people really get mixed up when they're seeing some of the headlines and so forth, and some of the confusion. So let's go back to how you became your motivation to become a dietitian and
the queen of meat. Yeah. So I was really sick as a kid, and was always trying to figure out as a teenager what was wrong with my digestion. I didn't find out until I was 26 that I was celiac. So that explained why I was always underweight and just had a lot of problems as a kid. And the interest in sustainable farming actually was like tangential the whole way, and then finally kind of came together just those last few years. And so I worked on farms as my high school and college summer job, and then got more into farming, ended up marrying a farmer who made a choice to leave the corporate world and high tech to become a farmer. And so I spent 18 years living on an organic farm. And during that time, I at first was in the natural foods marketing space, and I worked for Whole Foods Market for a while. And then decided to go back to school to learn about nutrition, because even though I was gluten-free, I was still experiencing a lot of blood sugar crashes and sort of that roller coaster of, needing to eat every 2 hours. And I kept asking my doctors to test me for diabetes, and I was not at that level yet, but I knew something was really wrong. And just because I would feel so awful if I didn't eat every 2 hours. And still, if I end up maybe eating a little too many carbs for one meal, and then I'll really pay for it later. I can feel it. Anyway, so I learned about the work of Weston A. Price. I went to a conference. I started kind of diving into it. I went to a holistic nutrition program called NTA, Nutritional Therapy Association, and really learned a lot more about real food nutrition. And then decided to become a dietitian after that, because I really wanted to work more with the medical community and be able to take health insurance and just get a little more respect for everything. And so I spent about 7 years part-time working on my grad degree. And so I finally became a nutritionist, and I started a blog and started writing about nutrition. But I noticed that most people were really more interested in my life on the farm than nutrition. I mean, they were like into the nutrition, but they were really interested in, the pictures of the sheep and the goats and all of that stuff. And so I started blogging a little bit more about farm life, and noticed that the people who are talking about sustainability and, global sustainable diets are all pushing for less meat, no meat, vegetarian, vegan type diets. And I realized that there was no one that was coming from a more ancestral evolutionary biology perspective that was really pushing for a more holistic approach to human health and to sustainable farming. And so realized that there was an opportunity there. And so I just decided to write this book. I pulled Rob into it. I was kind of pestering him for a long time to write this with me. So we've been talking about writing this book for maybe 8 years. And he kept telling me it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right time. And it's true. When we first started doing these joint projects together, these like joint talks together, there would be like 4 people in the room. Like people just didn't care. And we just kept pushing anyway. And, you know, now when I go to an event, you know, in the ancestral health space and talk about sustainable diets and, you know, how we're going to feed the world this way, the room is packed. And it just really seems like the awareness of the need for understanding about sustainability and being able to articulate how a diet that's like a more hunter-gatherer type diet is actually can be done in a sustainable way. To kind of marry all those together is something that I think a lot of people are really hungry for, that information, and for it all to be in one space, right? Everyone's been so siloed. We've got nutritionists here, and we've got environmentalists here, and the environmentalists will say, well, some of them will say, you know, they can see the value in well-managed grass-fed cattle, but we all clearly need to eat less meat, you know, and they're still pushing that. And a lot of people in the nutrition space are more concerned with their abs and not really, you know, paying much attention to sustainability issues. And then we've got, you know, the vegans and vegetarians that are saying, well, it's, you know, ethically just completely wrong to eat an animal. And, you know, they're really not considering the nutritional impact that animal products have, especially on children. I'm glad that you brought that up initially, because that's my main concern is children, especially in low-income areas, in developing countries. We see a lot of malnutrition and stunting, and just a little bit of animal products can make such a huge difference to their lives long-term too. Like just getting in those first 1,000 days the right amount of fats and protein can really just make a massive impact on your longevity and how your brain develops. And so when people are saying it's wrong to eat meat, it's wrong to kill an animal, I think there's just so many other things that you need to consider. You know, the nutritional impact of meat, the environmental consequences of pulling animals off the land and only eating a diet of monocrops with fossil fuel inputs. And so, you know, all of those things together, you know, when you look at like what a diet of least harm would look like, it's actually a diet that includes large ruminant animals. You can, you know, one cow can, you know, produce about 500 pounds of meat. I guess I have to translate that to kilos. I don't know what that is in kilos.
Okay. Most people here in the US.
Okay. So, you know, we can't lead with the ethical argument. We have to fully understand the nutritional impact of animal products and what it looks like when we pull them out of the human diet. And then the environmental consequences of a food system that doesn't have any animal inputs. And so I don't argue for factory farming, but I do think that we need a lot more regenerative farming. And so that's the case we make in the book and in the film.
Yeah, and you know, your kind of life story really kind of tells us, you know, how nuanced and how intricate actually the problem is. And you know, I really appreciate that in the book, is that there was so much thought as to how wide the problem is, and you've just brought up probably about 10 different discussion points in terms of how difficult this issue is for human society. Now, going back to your kind of entry point, you know, we share the same entry point, is that, you know, there was this dentist going around the world in the early 1900s telling people that we need to eat these high quality animal products. He was certainly showing that ancestral people were eating these high quality animal products, and they were living around them and cultivating them and growing them. This is, you know, they were doing this for generations and generations. And the impact it had on the craniofacial development, the crooked teeth. This is what I see in my clinic every day, and what I'm so passionate about as well, is that we need to understand this problem because our kids' teeth and jaws aren't developing, and that affects the brain, that affects how they breathe. And I think it's so crucial that we understand this problem. And you know, everyone's got their individual choice, right? But this is an issue that is affecting our next generation, and it's happened very quickly. Dana,
yeah,
you know,
and I was just going to mention too, his thesis was that a vegetarian diet was ideal, and that meat was one of the main drivers of cavities. So.
Exactly, yeah, and it really did. You know, when he went in and got his hands dirty and saw what people were doing, and then he measured. You know, he began to place the foundation for what we would understand about you know, why animal-based nutrition is so important. And we're still untying the problem. It's such a difficult area to understand. There's so many different reasons why we've kind of circled around, you know, this problem of meat, and you know, but it goes back, you know, nearly 100 years now. But I was actually led to your work from, you know, because I was interested in the farming space, you know, because I don't see much about this stuff. I see a lot of people talking about, you know, what we should eat and what we should, you know, what's better for the planet, but I don't see a lot of people actually getting their hands dirty. And that's what you show and you share on your blog, and obviously your backstory. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about a day in the life of Diana Rogers, and you know, what sustainable farming looks like, and living on your farm looks like?
Okay, well, slightly awkward because I actually am in the middle of getting a divorce, and so I moved off the farm. And I did like mention that on my Facebook page. Which is such a bummer because that was such a big piece of my lifestyle, and I'm sure it will be a piece moving forward in some way, and in just a different way. You know, it's an amazing, especially for my children, it's been such an amazing place to grow up because they're just outside in the dirt all the time. Mm-hmm. There's multiple tree houses that they've built. There's ponds. There's, you know, dogs they can run around with and everything. And so, you know, a lot of my time lately has been spent on finishing the film. And luckily, because we were able to finish all of the shoots before COVID happened, all of the editing happened remotely, starting in about January. So it took us from January until about July to do all the post-production on the film. And so I've been, you know, really working hard on that. I've opened my clinic back up again. So I hadn't been seeing patients for a while, just because it's just really difficult to switch gears for me from clinician to filmmaker to, you know, blogger and all that stuff. So I've been able to start seeing patients again, which is my favorite thing to do, is just help people, especially moms, because when you fix the mom, you fix everybody in the house. And so that tends to be the type of person that comes to me, is a mom that's kind of lost their way, or gained a little too much weight, or someone who's got some IBS problems. So I'm sort of really good at fixing Crohn's and colitis and IBS and you know, weird celiac issues. And so that's what I've been doing a lot of lately. And it's been nice because I'm a little ADD. And so, having the days be completely different every single day, having some time in the middle of the day to get out for a walk or go do a workout, run over to my office and see a few people, and then come back and you know, read some papers and stuff. It's been great.
It's such a big project, writing a book and obviously doing a film together. I don't envy you at all at how difficult this project must have been for your life. And you know, it really is a you know, it's two different worlds, isn't it? When you're seeing patients and then trying to communicate to people around the world, you know, what information and what kind of techniques there are out there. So it's such a huge demand on your life, and you know, it you must be really kind of coming to the point where it's sucked a lot out of you, right?
It has sucked my life force out of me. I mean, the film, like writing, you know, I had written 2 cookbooks and I thought that was hard. And then writing a nonfiction, like research book. I mean, just the table of contents took like a year to put together. Like, how are we going to construct this argument? Do we lead with environment because that's really the main argument? Or do we start with nutrition? You know, we really decided that both the film and the book need to really lay into nutrition early, because why even argue about whether food is sustainable if it's not optimal for human health, right? So a lot of the people that are pushing for these plant-based diets are saying, well, plants are more sustainable than factory farming, and so that's what we need to be eating and moving forward, right? Instead of like first backing up and asking the question, what is the optimal diet for humans? What's the most nutrient dense diet for humans? And then how can we produce that in the most sustainable way? And then at the end of the book, we talk about feeding the world and basically how we can't feed the world on our current system. It's just broken and it's not going to continue. And we offer a nutrition plan, which is, you know, very similar to a Whole30 or paleo, but we do try to take the emotion out of it and just look at nutrient density, which, when you just look at nutrient density, it's just completely undeniable that animal products offer so much more as far as bioavailability of protein and nutrients and just nutrient density per calorie. So oysters, other shellfish, fish, and red meats are the best meats you can be eating. I lump all sort of animal source foods into like the meat category, and then just take fruits, vegetables, leafy things like all into the plant category. So anyway, in the film, it's not as linear and logical as the book. It kind of hops around to different stories, but we do lay heavily into the nutrition argument early in the film, and then kind of weave the ethics in with the environmental stories, bringing the farms to people so that they can actually see what regenerative farms look like and meet the people who, you know, care deeply about the animals that they're raising.
Yeah, that was something that I really took from your book, because there's so many levels to it, as we've talked about, and we'll try and kind of go through them now. But for someone, you know, I've been looking at this space for a long time now, and I learned a lot about, you know, the background of agriculture and you know, really the problem points that we're sitting in at the moment. And you know, the system we have now is not sustainable. But that doesn't mean to say that eating meat is bad, which is kind of one of the argument points that people, I think, get confused with. What would you say is the state of play for someone that is opening your book, you know, who is reasonably, you know, open-minded, you know, but without a background, you know, that they haven't heard Rob talk, you know, for 15 years or so on the benefits of eating, you know, a hunter-gatherer style lifestyle. What is the state of play for someone that is, you know, picking up their paper, hearing, you know, meat is potentially bad for them, and then, you know, this also, you know, potentially having a health issue that they feel like they're trying to change their diet, you know, and we also have the supermarket meat, you know, out there that we understand, you know, that there are potential issues with. What's the entry point here, and then we'll start to unpack, you know, how to understand that a bit better.
You mean just nutrition? What's the nutrition kind of framework? Leaving the environment out, or?
Well, so what's the general? I mean, so people think meat is bad, right? So where does that come from? So where would you say where does that come from, and what is that based on now?
So we do have a chapter right in the beginning of the book called Meat as Scapegoat. So maybe that's what you're referring to, is just kind of where did this bias against meat even come from in the first place? Because there is this, you know, as a society, meat is seen as dirty and bloody and masculine, and you know, meat is the most powerful food that that there is. It's the most polarizing food. And so there's this really great researcher in Brussels who I've become really good friends with, Frederic Leroy. He's in the film just briefly. I wanted more of him in there, but it's just so hard to, get as much as I would have had all 30 interviews for a whole hour long, but anyway, he's got some really interesting papers that he's a meat scientist, but he talks anthropologically about meat, and has done a deep dive. And then I've looked at also the work of Belinda Feck. And so, a lot of this in the Western world, a lot of this comes from the Seventh-day Adventists and seeing meat as something that gives people impure thoughts. And so the idea that being a vegetarian is actually more pure, like in the eyes of God, right? And interestingly, Seventh-day Adventists are who started the dietetics movement and the nursing movement. And so we kind of go into like, where did this all come from? And also in England, there was, a lot of people traveling to India and romanticizing India and saying that, isn't that culture just so enlightened? And they kind of decided that it was one of the reasons they were so enlightened was because they were vegetarian. But I actually have a podcast that's going to be coming out next week about why that's such a fallacy. And actually the government is actually restricting meat in order to keep classes down. Like it's a totally elitist, classist, kind of racist movement in India, what's going on right now. I mean, people are getting stoned to death for even being rumored to have transported meat. So it's really what's going on with India is really intense. Anyway, so we've got all these biases against meat already, the cultural biases. Even when I go to a restaurant, I'll often order a steak. And if I'm with someone who's male who doesn't order a steak, the steak automatically gets delivered to the guy, right? It's like a dude thing to eat a steak, and, women eat chicken and salads. And all the women that are coming into my clinic are chronically underfed as far as protein goes. I mean, they're eating like 20, 30 grams of protein a day, and wondering why they feel terrible. They have black circles under their eyes and they've gained all this weight. And so, my trick is actually to just like bump up their protein way up. And, men are easily swayed in that direction, and women, I have to spend like a good 45 minutes talking them into it. So, anyhow, so I hope that answered your question. It's really, we've got a lot of cultural biases against meat, and that translates into dietary guidelines. I mean, the position paper of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics on vegetarian and vegan diets, that was written, every single author on that paper was a vegetarian or a religious vegetarian, vegan. So we've just got a systemic bias against meat going. And when we vilify meat, we actually are allowing the fossil fuel industry and the processed food industry to kind of skate free, because it's much easier for us to blame one thing than to take on an entire industry. So if we can just pin all of our fears about our failing health and the environment on a cow, then that's much simpler for our brains to wrap our heads around than to realize that it's the entire food system that's broken. It's our entire transportation and consumerist way of life that's the big problem.
Absolutely. And agriculture itself has taken a real, like you say, it's taken a real front in that conversation. It seems like that's probably 80% of what people will kind of cover when they're when they're trying to discuss these topics, and then it all gets kind of thrown into what we think about meat. so you're describing what your patients are, trying to convince women, for example, to eat more meat. And I think this is a really important topic because I see this in the practice all the time. I see exhausted mothers who are completely depleted from years of, one, they've had to grow a child, but then two, they're not eating the foods that are nourishing their body. And these are, I always going to animal foods, but it's this barrier, right? And part of that is you mentioned dietary guidelines. What are some of the obviously this goes back a while now, where and there's been a lot of discussion on this, but there's been there was a recent discussion from the World Health Organization about meat as a carcinogen, which I think kind of wraps into why females generally kind of lean away from it and not see it as a healthy food. What are some of these kind of misconceptions that are floating out there, or how do you see these?
Yeah, I mean, in my community, everyone's, highly educated, very concerned about longevity and overall health, and nobody eats red meat here. They're just totally freaked out. And it's unfortunate because the media doesn't know how to read science. And so when they hear that meat is a class 1 carcinogen and, glyphosate is also in that category, oh my God, meat is as bad as glyphosate. But, that the studies against meat are so flawed. They're largely large population studies, observational studies, where they're looking at one group of people, a large group of people that report to be eating meat. We know that self-reporting data on diet is completely inaccurate. People will underreport the foods that they perceive as unhealthy. They will maybe remember the burger, but forget the fries and the 72-ounce soda and the deep fried apple pie that they had with it. They're less likely to report their smoking and drinking. And when you compare a typical vegetarian to a typical omnivore, like Joe Sixpack, they're vastly different lifestyles, right? And so when you adjust for all those confounding factors, you see very different results. And so there was one study that looked at shoppers of health food stores. So, that's a very similar type of person that would shop at a health food store. They're, likely to do yoga and probably less likely to smoke and drink than someone who doesn't shop at a health food store. And they found absolutely no difference at all in longevity between omnivores and vegetarians. And then when we look at nutrient deficiencies in vegetarians and vegans, especially in vegans, it's really high. And so, considering that humans are omnivores, that humans have eaten animal protein and fat for 3.5 million years, what's new in our diets today? It's ultra processed food, right? So if we were to look at the entire span of human existence, we've only been eating processed food for like less than my, fingers worth of time. And in that amount of time, we've also seen an explosion in type 2 diabetes and obesity, and nutrient deficiencies at the same time. And the ultra processed foods that we're eating are highly addictive. They're highly they're not satiating. They're oh my gosh, my mind is blanking on the word.
The opposite of satiation.
The opposite. They make you eat a lot. So anyway, it's all the stuff in Wired to Eat that Rob Wolf wrote. Sorry, my brain just like totally drew a blank there, and then I realized I was live, which actually made me even more nervous. And so this hyperpalatable ultra processed food that makes you overeat, basically. It's really hard to overeat a roasted chicken, steamed broccoli, and a sweet potato, and it's really easy to overeat a tray of lasagna. And then, go straight for the ice cream sundae right afterwards.
Absolutely. And the hormonal kind of roller coaster that you go on after it locks you into a cycle of craving these foods. Science is pretty established on this now, and people are quite aware of this. I feel that there's and also too, you mentioned veganism. The moving away from meat has developed a lot in the not too distant past, right? So when I remember when I was growing up, I knew a couple of vegetarians, but now, you see people talking about veganism wasn't even a thing. It's a very, very recent phenomenon, and it's kind of, really kind of stepped up on the, avoidance of animal products. And, it really is, there's a difference between, deficiencies that vegans and vegetarians even see.
A huge difference. And yeah, I just want to address that too, because a lot of people will think, well, vegetarians don't eat meat, but I actually categorize eggs and people who say they're pescatarian, which is, fish flesh is not that far off from chicken or beef, really. And so eggs are a meat. And so there's a huge difference between, I think people can be healthy vegetarians with enough protein. But I absolutely, a vegan diet is not something that humans were meant to eat at all.
Yeah, and it is a very, very, very recent phenomenon. So yeah, I feel that we've kind of missed that, that kind of how non-human it actually is, and how our brains really
need that diet. Yeah, exactly.
Right? And it does kind of lend us towards towards the processed foods that we are kind of subject to today. Let's dive into the nutritional qualities of meat, just so people can kind of put it on the table. In the end, this is their own decision. Tanya asks us to compare how bad is supermarket beef compared to grass-fed beef.
Good question. That's a very common question. And, Rob and I really tried to check all of our biases when we wrote this book and be completely as objective as possible, like as scientific as possible. So we looked at all the science out there, all the peer-reviewed research on glyphosate residue, on antibiotic residue, on E. coli in grass-fed beef versus typical beef, on the different nutrients between grass-fed beef and typical beef. And what we found, unfortunately, for our case, is that there's not a massive difference nutritionally to humans between feedlot finished beef and grass finished beef. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And it actually kind of makes sense. So all cattle start on grass. So a lot of people will assume that, factory farm meat is, on a feedlot its whole life. And that's actually not true. So 85% of our beef cattle population today is actually grazing on land that we can't crop anyway. So it's actually, pooping and peeing and grazing on land and improving land in many cases that would just be fallow and unused anyway. So they're eating food that we can't digest on land we can't crop. So it's not like they're wasting space. And then, because they have rumen, they're actually, the bacteria in their stomach is actually almost like translating the food from cellulose to fatty acids, which is really what the cow is living off of. And so it's very different from a monogastric animal like a chicken or a pig, which what they eat is much more influential in their fat content and fat makeup in their protein. So that's one reason. And also even feedlot beef, only 10% of their diet is actually grain of their overall lifespan. And so it's actually, there are some differences in omegas. Some studies have shown twice the omega-3 in grass-fed beef compared to typical beef. Other studies, large studies, have seen a wide variety in omegas all over the spectrum between 1-to-1 in a Wagyu cow, which is a certain breed of cow that's very fatty, to a 20-to-1 ratio, omega-6 to omega-3. So 20 omega-6 to 1 omega-3, which is pretty bad. But when you consider that beef is a horrible source of omegas to begin with, and so even twice as much omegas is like 2 pennies compared to 1 penny. Like it's twice as much money, but it's not a lot of money to begin with. You would still need to eat 8 pounds of grass-fed beef to get the same omega-3 that you would get in a 3-ounce piece of wild salmon. And so what I recommend to people is buy the best meat they can afford to buy. If they can't afford grass-fed beef, or there's not access to grass-fed beef, it's still a nutrient-dense food that they should, choose over bagels and mac and cheese and pizza. If you want to really reduce your omega-6s and increase your omega-3s, then stop eating ultra-processed foods and ultra-processed vegetable oils, and switch to a more paleo type diet of meat and vegetables and less grains and fast food and things like that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, Rob is always such a stickler for the details, right? So and any kind of work that he does and the work you guys have put together is, you comb through the research. Interesting. When you looked at those comparisons, anything on is it all muscle meat, or have they talked about organs at all, or is it all just comparing muscle meat?
It's comparing muscle meat. So they did, I think it was in the one very large study, I think it was all ribeyes from these cattle. If we were to look at dairy products, there is a significant difference, because the difference is in the fats, not in the protein. And so dairy is higher in fat. And so we do see more of a difference in fats. We see more of a difference in pasture-raised eggs versus typical, conventional battery-raised eggs. Those are definitely worth it. But spend your money on pasture-raised eggs if you're going to eat some eggs. It's way better than twice the money to eat a pasture-raised egg. But just with beef, just talking nutrition. And I think it's important to just be an objective clinician and not emotional about it, right? Like for people who are food insecure, I would never tell them eat organic vegetables or don't eat vegetables, right? If someone's struggling, choose the beef over the bagels and the box dinners, because it's still going to give your kids iron. It's still going to give them B12. It's still a more nutrient dense food than a box of macaroni and cheese.
It's interesting, because grass-fed beef kind of gets the most kind of airwave, in terms of what we should be purchasing. But when you hear that from someone that with your experience, and I think it's really great information for people to choose what is the most bang for their buck, because this stuff is expensive, and we're all trying to kind of navigate through this when buying from the supermarket.
I was just going to say, there's cheaper ways, right? So you can do ground grass-fed, you can do organ meats from grass-fed, so there's cheaper way. And I'm not pushing feedlot beef. I've just found that people have no ability to absorb nuance these days, and so that's not what I'm saying. There's amazing environmental reasons and amazing ethical reasons to choose grass-fed regenerative beef. But it's also just not accessible to most people, and elitist to say, grass-fed beef or nothing. And so I just want to kind of
absolutely. But, we have to be hyper practical in this, because this is a difficult issue, and it is very difficult for people to access grass-fed beef in a lot of areas. So just knowing that there is research to show that there isn't a heap of difference. There's difference, but not a heap of difference, is a good piece of information. So we have to be kind of shrewd in understanding that, and everyone should be shrewd in understanding what is going into their body, and putting all of that information on the table, right?
Exactly.
Diana, just on this topic, Jocelyn asked, just because you've got experience on the farm, should we always aim to have organic fruits and vegetables versus conventionally given pesticides, etc.? What's your view on that?
Again, if you can afford it, if you have access to it, I definitely think it's a better choice. If you can buy from a local farmer, it's going to be way fresher. You're going to have more nutrients in the plants, because as the broccoli sits there, it's going to start losing its vitamin C and other nutrients. And so the fresher you can get it, the more organic, the better. But I also think that it's important not to stress too much all the time about organic and grass-fed, and to just, it's way more important to me as a nutritionist that people eat meat and vegetables than grass-fed meat and organic vegetables, because just when you look at the greater population and what we've got going on in the US, I've worked in hospitals. It takes a certain level of privilege to even be concerned about longevity and not getting type 2 diabetes. And a lot of people just don't, that's just not where their head is at, right? They're worried about, they just want to eat something that's delicious. They want to eat something quick, that's kind of easy to make, that they know their kids are going to eat. And so, worrying about whether or not it's grass-fed and whether or not it's organic, again, I think those are important conversations to have. But it's also just, let's put that into perspective a little bit and understand that just not everybody is concerned about that. Some people are more worried about their car starting tomorrow, or whether or not they're going to get fired. So it's a crazy time right now.
Absolutely. And this is, you're talking about the majority of people. So we're trying to, have a discussion about how we bring this forward for a broader population. And that is absolutely good advice, in my opinion, that people, you can't feel down if you don't have access to these kind of organic products, and they are very expensive. But so that hearing it from a dietitian's, mouth, that if they just eat conventional fruit and
you're still going to be better off than eating a bagel. I mean, that's just the reality of it. However, I have a lot of people that come to me saying, oh, well, I can't afford a nutrition consult. Maybe I'll, talk to you when I get back from Paris. Right. And so there's this other, side of the story. If you have a cell phone and a fancy car and, access to a lot of privilege, I highly recommend you consider supporting regenerative farmers with that extra money that you have, because we need more people doing that, and it needs to come from consumers. And there is some policy that we can do there, and I'm trying to work that angle as well. But this is largely going to be driven by consumer demand.
And that I'd like to finish on those points as to how you see, the future of this and how we change this at a broader level. Before we go into that, do you want to just cross and just to give a little bit of a summary sheet on the nutritional benefits of meat? So what are the nutrients that people can access from meat and that meat has? And also too, because I like how you kind of bring things together, like with the chicken and seafood conversation, because I feel that's quite illogical that we separate these things in terms of meat. How you put that together and the nutritional basis for meats.
Yeah. So I separate things in the book into animal-based foods and plant foods, right? And I don't know why there's red meat, and then I don't know, even some people put pork in its own category, and then we've got poultry in its own category, and then seafood in its own category. It's all just animal-based foods and plant-based foods. And animal-based foods give us things that plant-based foods can't give us. So one, it's a more bioavailable source of protein, and it's more nutrient-dense source of protein than any plant-based food. So you can get 30 grams of protein from about a 4-ounce piece of steak. That's about 200 calories, or you would have to eat 750 calories worth of beans and rice to get the same 30 grams of protein. And the protein in the beef is going to be more bioavailable to you and have more nutrient density. So you're going to get more B12. Actually, you're not going to get any B12 from beans and rice. but you're going to get the full spectrum of amino acids. You're also going to get a lot of other vitamins and minerals. And it's really cool to be able to track that yourself. I did this really geeky experiment where I was trying to get 100% of all my vitamins and minerals just through real food. And I was tracking everything in Chronometer. Have you ever used that before? So you can,
yeah. I
yeah.
haven't used it in the clinic actually. Yeah, I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, well, I love that app in particular compared to the other ones that are out there because you can track your micronutrients too. And so I like to, in my clinic, make it about getting food instead of excluding food. And so I'm trying to get them to look at, okay, well, how are you going to get that extra copper? How are you going to get the selenium? Like, it's hard to get selenium. And how are you going to meet your protein goals? So if I give them a high protein goal, like say, you know, someone really needs to lose weight, I might give them a protein goal. Actually, today I gave someone a protein goal of 150 grams. And I was like, that's going to be really hard for you. But she's so used to diet culture that actually to try to you know, look at it a different way and try to get to, you know, give herself more of something and have like a goal where she has to, you know, get more of, and then I'm going to work in the micronutrients soon too. Like, let's take a look at your copper and zinc and, you know, okay, well, maybe we can throw some oysters in there and get the zinc that you need. So there's nutrients that we can't get from animal products like B12, but then there's other nutrients that are really hard to get from animal products, either because it's not in the proper form, or it's just like you'd have to eat so much of it that it's almost impossible, or it would just make you a very unpleasant person to sit next to at a dinner table, right? And so B12 is something you can't get in plants. Iron is something that's much more bioavailable in animal products because it comes in the heme form, which we need. Beta, I mean, I could go on and on. Beta carotene is the precursor to vitamin A. That's the orange color that you see in pumpkins and sweet potatoes. But 45% of humans don't make the conversion to vitamin A very easily. And so there's a lot of genetic reasons why someone might do better on a vegetarian or vegan diet than others. And, you know, we need vitamin A. And if you eat animal source foods, you're actually getting the right form of vitamin A, and it doesn't need to go through any sorts of conversions. And so it can just be very, very difficult to get the nutrients you need from plant-based foods. And iron is another huge one, especially for children. There's a lot of people that don't have, again, the privilege to go to a CVS and get their B12 supplements. And we actually talk about this in the film. You know, we show some footage from Rwanda with a professor at the University of Florida that works with trying to get these guys to be more efficient with their livestock and eat more animal-based foods, because there's no doctors around for hundreds of miles. There's no pharmacies where they're going to get their iron tablets or their B12 supplements. They have to be eating animal-based foods, right? But even when we bring that back to America and we look at the schools that are trying to restrict meat, we look at the Meatless Mondays program, which is completely not evidence-based at all. There's never been a study that showed that when we pull meat away from children, they're going to do better in any way. There's actually only been one RCT done on kids that were food insecure, where they looked at more meat versus less meat, and the kids who had the more meat did better academically, physically, and behaviorally than the kids who had less meat. So there's just a lot of reasons why we want to be eating more animal foods. And I mean, I think plant-based foods are great. I'm not saying everyone needs to be 100% carnivore, but I think that most people benefit from actually increasing their intake of animal-based foods.
Exactly. As you said before, you know, humans are omnivores, and, you know, there's even been this kind of delineation to, you know, these carnivore diets now. And that's really based on the idea of nutrient density, is that how nourishing animal foods are, and that, you know, the body really needs and absorbs them. Vitamin A you bring up, which I think is really important that people just do not talk about enough. Can you just give us a quick perspective on someone trained in dietetics? Because obviously the active form in retinol is in animal products, as you say. What's the general recommendations? Because people are very scared about vitamin A. And
for toxicity, you mean, like overdoing it? Yeah. It's you can't overdo it in real food. Hold on one second. I just want to. You guys can walk through. My kids just walked in the door. You can go through. So tell me the question again. Vitamin A.
About vitamin A, yeah.
So you should be concerned about vitamin A, and the supplement industry is just, I see a role for supplements, for good supplements, but I also know that they're not regulated and they often don't contain what they say they contain. And people are overdosing all the time on supplements. And I've had people come in, especially with B vitamin overdosing. So it's very, very dangerous, and we don't know a lot about what can happen with taking too many supplements. Folate is really good at growing tumors, for example. And so, we just need to be really, really careful about all of that. And so you don't want to take your vitamin A through supplements. You actually want to just eat it from animal-based foods.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you see a lot of people with gluten intolerances and chronic digestive issues.
Mm-hmm.
What's a patient story that you can kind of share as to people that are kind of struggling with these problems? How does their body start to respond when they begin to change their food, and in particular eating more meat, as you say things kind of revolve around?
I mean, I've reversed type 2 diabetes. I've reversed people that were having to take insulin on type 2 diabetes. I've seen people that had to sleep in reclining chairs because they had GERD so badly. Just switching to a whole foods paleo type diet, they were able to reverse all of that. So I think there's a lot of food intolerances that people are experiencing that they just think aren't normal parts of life. I certainly thought that when, before I was diagnosed with celiac, I thought everyone was in searing pain every day after they ate. And so it's really, when you go from feeling, if feeling like a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 is your baseline, you don't even know what a 10 is like, right? So I get people who are maybe I think the majority of people, and maybe you can agree with me, they're walking around and feeling about a 6, right? On a scale of 1 to 10. And they're like, especially at my age or older, they're thinking that, the nagging knee injury is just a normal part of life, or whatever, the rashes that they get, or, whatever it is. And then, they start, when you change your diet, which I really believe is about 80% of your overall health is just from diet. The rest is sleep and movement and stress and other stuff. And they start feeling like a 9 or 10, and then they have like a cheat night or whatever, and they, go to a wedding or a party or something, and they eat something off plan. They realize what a 3 really feels like. And they're like, oh God, I don't ever want to feel like that again. So, if people, follow what I say and are motivated to make the change, and that's why I like working with, people with gut issues, it's a little easier to get them to comply, right? Like if I can take away, help them get pregnant, or, take away their Crohn's or colitis symptoms, they'll stand on their heads and eat coffee grounds for 3 months, just to do that, right? So they'll do anything. It's just a really rewarding experience.
Yeah, and I like how you say that, some people are kind of operating at a 6, maybe even a 7. But something that I've kind of really dived into in the last couple of years after going through these dietary changes, earlier in my life, that there's steps for this to go. So I don't know, the body is an incredibly responsive thing. We learn and understand so many things when what we take in. Diet gives us that power to be able to really take things to that next level. I've seen so many people, change their lives, by just, turning the lights on in understanding what the power of food has.
Mm-hmm.
Diana, as we start to wrap this up, I wanted to. The last third of your book talks about, kind of the bigger problem of, how we solve this going forward, because this is an issue that it bothers me that, we don't understand, our food system, and that, how we can, sustainably create nutrient dense food for our next generation.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you think need to be placed into things like legislation, and how can people help? What can people do, today and tomorrow to start to change this? Because I think it's a big problem.
I agree. So legislatively, there are programs in place that actually pay farmers to not graze land and not utilize, land that is perfectly, grazable and would benefit from grazing animals. And so there's a lot of underutilized land out there. There's a lot of fallow land, meaning it's not being used at all. There's a lot of land in cropping that really should be grazed and not cropped. I looked at the numbers, and it does appear that we do have the land to grass finish all of our beef cattle herd in the US. And that's not to say that, I think, it needs to be grass-fed beef for all. I think this is a very complex topic, and I think it needs to be regionally specific to, where are we looking? Is it a grassland area? Is it a tropical area? What are the cultural preferences as far as food goes for these people? What type of refrigeration do they have? Can they store half a cow or do they even have electricity? The farm where I was working, we had a lot of Peruvians from the Sacred Valley that didn't have electricity, and so guinea pigs were the way to go, because it's like one meal. That's the thing. And they loved it. And, when you talk to them and ask them like what meal they want their mom to cook them when they go back home, it's like guinea pig, And so I just think it needs to be, the animal source protein needs to be context specific. As far as people go, we need more people volunteering on farms. There's a lot of people right now that are underemployed or unemployed or have free time, going to CrossFit. A farmer's carry is a legit actual thing that farmers do on a farm. And so, if you're a strong person and able, I highly recommend that you go volunteer on a farm. If you're somebody who is really good at web coding and, maybe a farmer needs a website, I think there's just a lot of things that everyone can do to help improve the local regional food system. And then in the book too, it was really interesting. We wrote it way before COVID. And I sent our list of things, because we have a whole list of non-food things and non-farming things that people can do to just be like a more, sustainable member of society. Things like don't get yourself into crazy debt. Don't, keep yourself healthy so you're not a burden on the healthcare system. And what are we seeing today? People who are metabolically unhealthy are the ones that are suffering the most from coronavirus. People who don't have, I recognize that not everyone is able to, have a savings account to bounce on. But the level of materialism that I see, spending on all kinds of ridiculous things, we've got a huge problem with credit and debt in America. So that's all part of this, actually. In my opinion, we need to be looking at our food systems, but we also have to be looking at our living systems and making sure that we're, doing the best we can.
Prioritizing what is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there any organizations that you would suggest in the US that people could reach out to, or it seems like is a weekend? Could people go and spend a weekend with a farmer? Is that something that people could do?
Yeah, I mean, not right now, but yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of farm stay opportunities. I know Bel Campo runs a meat camp. Probably not at this moment, but they do. I mean, just going to a farmer's market, talking to the farmers, supporting them, and then seeing if there's an opportunity for them to visit or help. You know, do you have a big project coming up? Do you need help building a barn? Do you need help, just kind of getting your hands dirty and working alongside the farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. Dinah, thank you so much for joining us and sitting with us and sharing your work. It really is a life's passion. Where can tell us about where people can purchase your book and also the film that's upcoming?
Yes. So the book is available everywhere books are sold, on Amazon.
That's the cover sitting behind you.
What's that?
It's the cover sitting behind you.
Yes, it's the cover sitting behind me. So I have a website called sacredcow.info, and folks can check that out. They can see a trailer for the film there. They can also sign up to get updates on when we're going to be releasing the film. So this fall, we're going to release the film for free to everyone who wants to see it. We have your email address, we'll send you a link. And so it's going to be 1 week only. And there's also going to be an opportunity to purchase all of the videos. So if you're interested, like I am, in seeing the entire video interview that I did with Frederick Lavoie, who I mentioned earlier, or Nicolette Hahn-Nyman, or Rob Wolf, or Chris Kresser, or Mark Hyman, those are all going to be available for purchase. And then probably in January or so is when the film will be available. Like we're kind of talking to the mainstream streamers right now. So it'll be out there, but we wanted to get this out like as soon as we could, just for a 1 week special preview, just to get that out there and get people excited about it.
Is the documentary's name Sacred Cow? Or is it? Yeah.
Yep. The documentary is called Sacred Cow. And we went to Belgium, we went to England, Mexico, and all over the US and interviewed tons of farmers, butchers, and Leah Keith, who is an ex-vegan. We have her story in there as well. So hopefully folks will find it entertaining, and actually a perfect combination. The book and film are meant to work together. So the book has all the science, and the film has more of the visual stories and the emotion behind all of it.
The people behind all the magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dinah, thank you so much for your work. Just one more thing: if people are looking to work with you, how do you have a separate clinician contact?
Yeah. I do, actually. Yes, it's sustainabledish.com is my clinician website. Thank you for asking. And I do virtual, I do in person if people live in Massachusetts with a mask. And sometimes health insurance covers it because I am a registered dietitian. I'm in network with Blue Cross and other major insurance companies. So, but I also have cash rates, and I really enjoy working with people. So thank you for reminding me to make that plug.
Absolutely. And, I as a healthcare practitioner, finding dietitians who are mindful in the areas that you are mindful are extremely rare. So I really highly recommend anyone that is struggling with a diet related health problem or chronic issue that you seek out someone with Diana's experience, because, the way that food can change your body is profound. Dinah, thank you so very much. I'm really looking forward to the documentary, and I'll definitely be tuning in as soon as it comes out and tuning in further to your work. And I thank you so much for all your life's work into really kind of bringing this story out and to change this hopefully this story for the next generation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your support.
Appreciate it, Dinah. Have a great day.
Thank you.